Cleveland's always had a long and strong rock and roll history.
This is the first museum devoted to the history of rock and roll.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum, may I help you?
Tonight on News Center 8's Interview.
Cleveland is just good rock and roll territory.
The city that gave the music a name.
Hi, everybody. This is Alan Freed.
That's considered the first rock concert.
Prepares to welcome rock and roll fans from around the world. His design will house the history.
Well, I have to find some way to express the music.
Their vision will fill the museum with personality.
We're trying to accomplish one thing, dispel rock and roll out mannequin-wise.
It's not like a typical museum.
These treasures will give rock legends immortality.
This is Roger Daltrey's outfit.
Couldn't build the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame without Elvis.
Cleveland's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum. It's almost ready. Are you ready for a look inside?
And welcome to another edition of News Center 8's Interview. I'm Robin Swoboda.
And I'm Tim Taylor. Cleveland's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum. Many of you are familiar with the striking building that has risen on the lakefront. After 9 years in the making, the rock is finally stopping here.
But what most people aren't aware of is all the shake, rattle, and roll going on behind the scenes, preparing for the big Labor Day grand opening. Come September, Cleveland becomes the mecca for music lovers. Over 1 million visitors from all over the world are expected to visit the Rock Hall in the first year alone.
And what will the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum mean to all those music fans? A lot depends on what takes shape in the next few months in putting it all together. And that's exactly the interview we want to share with you today.
For the last few weeks, we hung out, traveled, and worked side by side with the staff of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is the first time anyone has seen all of what's going into rock music's first permanent home. We begin our journey where else but at the beginning. A little history to remind us all why Cleveland truly is the home of rock and roll.
I think Cleveland's always had a long and strong rock and roll history.
Cleveland was a very important hit-making city.
The thing that made Cleveland so important is that it got its exposure here. Type of music that Alan Freed played up until that time, no one had heard that type of music.
This is the song, and it's all about Mr. Freed.
A Saturday night in Cleveland, 12,000 moondoggers remember Alan Freed and the music that became known as rock and roll.
I will say this about my brother. He loved the music himself, and he was dedicated to bringing this music into the mainstream of American music.
Back in 1951, Alan Freed first aired his Moondog show on what later became TV8's sister station, WJW Radio.
Moondoggers, as Aaron Brew brings you the Moondog Show.
Alan started using the phrase more and more. We're going to rock and roll tonight.
This is Alan Freed, the old king of the Moondoggers, and it's time again for another of your favorite rock and roll sessions.
It became known as rock and roll music.
Here is the original recording of Sincerely by the Moonglows.
More than 40 years later, Harvey Fuqua still tours with the group discovered by Alan Freed, the Moonglows.
Alan listened to us over the phone and said, look, they sound good, bring them down to the studio. So we went down to the studio the next night, and he loved us and said, let's record something.
In 1952, Harvey Fuqua wasn't on stage, but in the audience at the world's first rock concert at the old Cleveland Arena.
A car passes by and you hear a rock song, you say, oh my God, what did I help start?
Well, I documented it. I didn't start it.
Peter Hastings spent 30 years photographing the Cleveland Orchestra, but he'll always be remembered for his historic photographs of the first Moondog Coronation Ball.
But you were at the very first rock concert.
Didn't know it.
Didn't even know it. Huh?
Didn't know it. I was there, and it was exciting, let me tell you.
On March 21st, 1952, the world's first rock concert turned into a near riot.
They lowered the lights in the arena, and then a lot of chaos broke loose, and there were some injuries, there was some violence.
He was very apologetic about the circumstances that happened.
We can't tell you how deeply sorry I am for what happened last night.
We're gonna really rock and roll tonight.
By 1954, Freed was wooed by the bright lights of New York City. But he left behind a musical legacy that helped Cleveland land the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Hi, everybody. This is Alan Freed. Back in 1951 in Cleveland, we coined a phrase that became the biggest pop musical era in the world. The words rock and roll.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music.
I think he could read the future a little bit. So I think he was, in a sense, a visionary.
Cleveland, you are the greatest audience in all the world. And I really want to thank you for coming out.
Interview will be back in a moment.
Interview, Building the Rock, is brought to you in part by Columbia Gas.
Force behind the monument to rock rising from North Coast Harbor.
I think he's such a smart man.
He is I.M. Pei, world-famous architect, who at the age of 70 was asked to design the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum.
I thought they must be kidding.
But they were dead serious, and the man who had crafted symphony halls, skyscrapers, and even the Louvre in Paris started to do his homework.
I subscribed to the Rolling Stone magazines for 2 years.
He also grabbed his kids' rock and roll records and forced himself to listen.
I sensed the tremendous energy that is in that music. In the beginning, I find it difficult to take because I don't have the same energy that they have. But I've come to accept that.
When Pei became a believer, his New York firm got to work.
We're very excited. It's going to be a great building.
The fact that the building has a vertical dimension is very important.
A huge 17 stories of vertical dimension, in fact, surrounded by a massive tent of glass.
What does the tent design portray or symbolize?
It's performance. Rock and roll is a performance. This building, in some ways, is a non-building. It's transparent. I use practically no color. As you know, it's all white because I wanted people to be presented.
And this is some of what those people will be presented with. Life-size mannequins of rock stars in one of 3 rock and roll poses.
What's the rock and roll pose?
This is the solo pose.
Right.
And then there's the A-line Elvis pose. And then there's the walking pose.
New York fashion designer Stephen Sprouse is in charge of arranging the hall's collection of historic threads on the mannequins' backs and elsewhere.
The difficult part was to make the mannequins the right size. We had no idea that the waist would have to be 28, 29, or 30-inch waist. They had to be very small to accommodate the clothing.
Even the matching noggins are crafted with precision.
Kind of standard male head. It can be black, it can be white.
Could be real interesting, too, once they start matching up the painted heads with the rockin' mannequins.
Singing sensation all over the country, Elvis Presley.
People were looking for something different, and I was lucky. I came along just in time.
Well, you just knew that Elvis Presley had an incredible kind of charisma when you saw the way people reacted to him. And then the rest of it just happened.
But not without the help of Bill Randall. In 1955, the Cleveland DJ was the most influential record spinner in the country.
With Presley, we took him out to Brooklyn High School.
Well, the story goes that the principal at that time, John Naiman, was a friend of Bill Randall's.
I think we're probably the only high school library that has in our pamphlet file
has a rock and roll file.
Has a rock and roll and an Elvis Presley file.
It was Elvis's first major appearance north of the Mason-Dixon line.